Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, OP supports his wife's writing dreams, sacrificing for her success. However, suspicions arise when her agent's behavior becomes suspect. Discreetly investigating, he uncovers evidence of an affair. Confronting both, he exposes the agent's misconduct, leading to his firing and his wife losing representation. With their marriage shattered, he plans to divorce, leaving his wife to face the consequences alone. Now let's get into the story. I, 33 male, have been with my wife, 30 female, for a little over 5 years now. She and I have a pretty standard marriage. There's nothing really to know about it. We have one child together, we both work, and we take a vacation once a year as a family. It's just your average middle-class suburban lifestyle. I've always known that my wife has wanted to be a writer, so last year we discussed our options and we figured out a way for her to try and pursue those dreams. She had a wonderful idea for a novel, and we decided to buy the bullet and struggle for a few months while she buckled down and wrote it. The writing went well, and eventually, she had her first full draft. After countless revisions on her end, she ended up looking for an agent to try and represent her so she could publish it. Somehow that was more difficult than writing the actual novel. We found some recommendations from Reddit about how a lot of conventions have time dedicated to pitching agents. We found a convention nearby and bought her a ticket. We couldn't both afford to go, so I stayed home with our son while she made some connections in the industry and sent out her manuscript. She came back the following Monday, and we didn't know for sure if she had any solid offers or not. After a few days, we got a call from an agent who wanted to represent her. We were over the moon. This particular agent had represented a lot of big-name authors and even had some bestsellers under their belt. I was extremely proud of my wife. She had put so much work into her novel, and it seemed like the risk that we'd taken with her quitting her full-time job was about to pay off. The agent lived in New York City and represented several authors in the Mid-Atlantic area. We didn't live too far from there, so it wasn't out of the picture for my wife to travel into the city. To meet with him, they both set a standing date for every other Friday to meet at his office in the city, so they could discuss potential publishers editing film and television rights, etc. I was under the impression that the agent would have wanted what was best for her, since they would be getting a cut of whatever deal the publishers made for her manuscript. What I didn't know was that he only agreed to represent her because he wanted to sleep with her. I wasn't worried for the first month of their relationship, but when their meetings became more frequent and my wife was going to New York once a week or more, I started to get suspicious. I would ask her if they were making any progress, and she would tell me that they were working on it, but couldn't give many details. She told me that she was scheduled to meet with publishers, but wouldn't give any specifics before that. Everything she told me would be full of details. I couldn't shake the feeling something was up. When I asked her if there was something going on, she got angry. She made it seem like I was crazy and jealous for even thinking. She could have been up to something. One weekend, she was scheduled to go to the city to see her agent again. She told me that she had a couple of important meetings with publishers lined up, so she would be staying in a hotel overnight. My gut was telling me it was a lie, so I decided to follow her. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I felt like she was lying and I just needed to clear a few things up. I dropped our son off with my mom for the weekend and followed her to New York. I started to think that maybe I was overreacting by waited anyway. About an hour of waiting passed, and she walked out with her agent. They were laughing and he had his hand on her back. That was a bad enough sign for me to continue watching them. They went to his car, leaving hers behind in the garage. I continued following them to see if anything else happened. First, they went to a nice restaurant together and ate outdoors, sharing a bottle of wine and holding each other's hands. I made sure to take some photos for evidence if needed in the future. Toward the end of what I realized was their date, her agent leaned over and kissed her. I was angry and hurt, but I needed to see what was going to happen with my own eyes. I followed them back to his townhouse, where I was no longer able to see them, but by the music I could hear playing, I could only assume they were sleeping together. I drove back home, taking advantage of my son, not being there to go into my wife's office without any witnesses. I tried to log into her computer, but the password I thought she would use didn't work. I realized then that she had something to hide on that computer. In any other circumstance, my wife's forgetfulness would have annoyed me, but I was able to find the username and password written down on a note. When I logged in, I found dozens of saved pictures and videos of her agent. In some of the conversations they had, it was clear he was role-playing some kind of weird power dynamic thing between them. Honestly, by the looks of it, he agreed to represent her entirely because of her looks. Before I left her office, I printed some of their chats and started planning how to expose them both. I figured if the agency that he worked for knew that he had done something so unethical they would drop him, so I reached out to them to see. It had taken several days for me to hear anything back from the senior partner of the agency. By the time they called me to listen to what I had to say, my wife was already back home and planning her next trip to the city. I told them everything, emailed the chats, and explained how the agent hadn't actually done anything to help with the novel. The partner told me that what he did was a breach of the agency's ethics and they would be dealing with him. I asked about what would happen with my wife's representation, and they told me that they would have another agent evaluate her work and see if there was a place for her. A few days passed and I'm sitting in the living room watching cartoons with my son, and my wife came running out of her office in tears. She said that the agency had dropped her because her agent was fired and no other agents wanted to take on her work. I sent my son to his room and told her to sit down. Then I explained what I did and how I was planning on divorcing her. She tried to deny it and tell me I was crazy, but I showed her the evidence. Everything was in my name, so I told her she had a week to find somewhere else to stay before I put the house up on the market, and that I would be at my mother's house with our son while she was getting everything sorted out. I grabbed my son and walked away from her, knowing that it was probably the worst day of her life and she had no one to turn to. Today's second story. In this story, after over a decade together, suspicions arose when his wife's behavior changed. Despite his trust, he discovered her infidelity through a private investigator, revealing explicit messages and encounters. Confronted publicly, she denied it but didn't contest the divorce. He supported the other man's spouse, who left him. Now navigating single life, he reflects on betrayal and rebuilding. Now let's get into the story. She and I have been together for over 10 years, but we have been married for 7. We met while we were in high school, and we had been together ever since. She was the only woman that I'd ever been with, and I thought that I was the only man she'd ever been with. We've had a good life together. We have raised 3 children, we own our own home, and we even have a vacation home in Florida that we go to every summer. It was almost like we were living the American dream. As we've gotten older, and as we've been focused on work and the kids, our intimate life has sort of diminished. It wasn't completely inactive, but it wasn't as vibrant as either of us probably hoped it could be. She was always exhausted after taking care of the kids, and after long days in the office, I was also tired. I started to notice that she was acting off. She had never been someone to care a lot about her physical appearance. I thought she was naturally beautiful, and I loved everything about her. She didn't have to wear makeup around me. She didn't have to dress nicely. I thought she was stunning with a clean face and sweatpants. However, she started going to the gym. She was petite, and after 3 kids she had more curves, and I guess she wanted to try to lose that weight. I cannot stress enough that I never encouraged her to go. She was my wife, and I loved her. The changes in her body were from carrying her children inside of her. I didn't mind them. On top of that, she was dressing up more. She was wearing nice dresses and new clothes. It reminded me of what she wore when we first started dating. I asked her about it, and she just told me that it was to help her feel more confident in herself. I took that explanation to heart. She had never done anything to make me think otherwise, so I assumed she just needed a little boost. A few weeks after we had that conversation, I noticed that she was very secretive with her phone. I had read way too many other Reddit stories to feel comfortable with knowing how sketchy she was being with her children. Her phone. So thinking we had a good communication line between us, I asked her about it. She told me that I was overreacting and that she wasn't doing anything on her phone. I didn't want to ask her to see it because I didn't want to cause an argument about not trusting her. She unlocked it and handed it to me, but I thought that was enough, so I just shook my head and apologized. One night, she told me that she was going to a book club that a local bookstore was hosting and left. I thought that she might be gone for maybe 2 hours. She didn't come back until 4 hours later. When I asked her where she was, she just told me she got some drinks with a couple of the girls after. Out of curiosity, I checked the bookstore's website and found out that they didn't have a book club meeting on the calendar. I'd had enough of her lies, so I figured if she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I would find it. My gut was telling me there was something wrong. I looked online and found a private investigator who I reached out to via email, and they agreed to take on my case. About a week later, she came back to me with the exact same story about the book club. I emailed the investigator and told him right away about the chance to catch her, so he jumped on the opportunity to see what she was doing. I stayed home, anxiously awaiting any news from the investigator. My wife came home over 4 hours later. Not long after, I got a phone call from the investigator, so I excused myself and took the call outside. He told me that he followed my wife to a house where a man greeted her, kissing her on the lips when he did, and they both stayed inside for several hours. He was able to look up the owner of the house and he had a name. Furthermore, when he did a search for the man online, he was able to find pictures he posted on a kink forum. The more he looked into his followers, people reacting to his posts, and she found a profile that belonged to my wife. I was completely shocked and heartbroken. On top of that, I was alarmed at how she would meet some random man off the internet and ruin our marriage by being with him. I needed to see what was going on between them exactly, so I waited for my wife to go to sleep, and I logged into her computer to try and get into the account. As luck would have it, she was logged in already, so I didn't have to do much hacking. I didn't know if the man she had gone to sleep with was the only one, but there were many other explicit message chains between her and strange men. I gathered screenshots of the most explicit parts, especially the parts where she had been sending pictures of herself to these men. There was no chance of reconciliation after this. She had thrown away our marriage for some meaningless flame. It was unforgivable. We had a family reunion coming up in a couple of weeks, so I thought that would be the best time to tell her about the news. If she was going to throw away our marriage, I was going to make sure she would regret it. The weeks passed, and I was just staying late at night, at work, and trying to avoid her as much as possible. It was hard to look at her knowing she had some of the conversations she did with those men. I had the divorce papers ready by the time the family reunion came around. All of the kids were playing in the pool or by the playset, while the adults sat around the table and had a few drinks and ate some barbecue. I stood up, asking for everyone's attention, and I turned to my wife and told her I was leaving her. There was a gasp from the crowd, and I handed her the papers that I brought with me. I explained to her and everybody else watching that I found the messages she was exchanging online, and I had reason to believe that she had cheated on me with one of those men. She dragged me away from the table and was fuming because of how humiliated she was. She tried to explain to me that she had never cheated on me and that the messages were just for her curiosity about certain things. She swore up and down she never acted on anything. But then when I brought up her kissing another man at their house, she was silent. We went through filing for the divorce, and she didn't ask for anything from me. If she had, she wouldn't have been awarded it because she was the one who cheated. The divorce was entirely her fault. She ended up moving in with her grandma and helping her dad around. We have joint custody of the kids, but they tend to want to spend more time with me. My private investigator was able to do some digging on the man as well. As it turned out, he was married and had several children of his own. I considered not getting involved, but it was the right thing to do. I found his wife and I showed her some of the evidence of their affair, and she ended up leaving him. She kept the house, she kept the kids, and she's getting spousal support from him. Now I'm trying to figure out how to get back into the dating scene. I've only dated one woman, and it ended pretty badly. Today's third story. In this story, OP joyfully prepares for fatherhood, lavishing his pregnant wife with care and material comforts. However, His world crumbles when her ex-husband claims paternity of their child. Despite denial, a DNA test confirms betrayal. Heartbroken, he evicts them, severs ties, and ends the marriage. Despite her pleas, he cannot forgive. Left shattered, he doubts love's existence, while his ex-wife faces single motherhood. Trust shattered, he struggles to move forward. Now let's get into the story. My wife and I married 2 years after dating, and she moved in with me. And a year after we married, she got pregnant and gave birth to a boy. It was one of the happiest moments of my life because I had always longed to be a father. Even before the baby was born, I made everything he would need available. We started shopping for baby stuff after we knew the baby's gender, and I even built his nursery myself. I wanted our child to be received with love and everything to be perfect, so I didn't hold back in spending. During her pregnancy, I cared for her in every possible way. It was difficult because she had those weird cravings, and each time she needed something, I got it for her, even if it was at an odd hour of the night. When the baby came, I was so happy, and I did everything possible to make life comfortable for my wife and child. To make my wife happy, I got her the latest iPhone as her push gift. I worked from morning to night to ensure I put food on the table and provided all their needs, even if it meant neglecting mine. We lived in peace and harmony until the baby was 6 months old. I noticed that my ex-wife started acting weird. There was a particular caller who never took the calls, and most times she would turn off the phone if the caller didn't stop calling. If she took the call, she'd go outside for it and spend time before she returned, which was very suspicious. The first time I asked about it, she told me it was a wrong number, but the more the caller continued calling, the more I was convinced it wasn't. Then one day all hell broke loose. I was home that weekend resting inside when someone knocked at the door, and naturally she went to get the door. Immediately she got to the door. I heard a man raise his voice, and before I could wrap my head around what was going on, she shut the door behind her. I was curious about who it was, especially since I kept calling her name and she did not respond. When I went outside, I recognized that she was a person who was not a person. The man that was yelling, it was her ex-husband. I recognized him from the photos she showed me. He was obviously furious and kept yelling at her to let him see his son. My first reaction was to order him off my property, but he said he wasn't leaving until he had seen his son. I was very confused because I didn't know what he was talking about. I thought my ex-wife would say something about the son he was yelling about, but she didn't. Instead, she yelled at him and called him names. She mentioned something about him being a cheat and a liar. And in anger, he called her a bigger liar. And he turned to me with the "I'm shocked you didn't know" look. Without wasting time, he told me that he was the father of the baby my ex-wife gave birth to, and she was only living with me because I took good care of her. It sounded like a lie, but it wasn't. Even as I typed this, I still felt the hurt I felt that day. It turned out that her ex-husband was telling the truth. I found out that she still met with him, and they got intimate whenever they met. And the reason she stopped taking his calls was because her ex-husband wanted to be part of the baby's life, but she refused, claiming he was a bad influence on the baby. At first, I didn't believe it. I wanted her to tell me he was lying, but she didn't. She started sobbing and even physically attacked him for ruining her life. I was so devastated and I couldn't even control my tears. After everything I had done for her and the baby, I didn't think she would betray me that way. All that while, I treated her with love, made hard sacrifices, and even built the nursery myself because I excitedly believed she was pregnant with our child. I still had doubts, so to be sure, we did a DNA test, which confirmed I was not the father of her baby, and I was very heartbroken. Without thinking twice, I kicked her and the baby out of the house. It was a very painful thing to do, especially with her innocent son, Crony. Funnily enough, she refused to leave that day. She kept begging for mercy and saying that her ex-husband would not help her raise the child and that I was still the child's father, irrespective of what happened, but I still kicked her out. I also collected the car I got for her because it was registered in my name and I was still paying for it. We divorced because I could not just forgive her or pretend nothing happened. Although she begged and called me several times, there was nothing I could do. She used me and was cheating on me with her ex-husband. In the end, I lost her. I lost the connection I had with the baby, and everything else went down the drain. All of the money, time, resources, and sacrifices I made counted for nothing. And although I have nothing on women, I don't think I'll ever trust and fall in love again. As for my ex-wife, she ended up raising the child alone. The last time I heard, her ex-husband had 3 baby mamas, so I guess she was the 4th. I haven't fully moved on by now. No, I'll get there.